to the Gather Gurus. My name is Katie. This is Brian. We are your hosts for today, chatting all about events, how you can leverage events to make your business more strategic and successful, and how you can make your events better. So today, our topic is talking about communications in events. So many communications professionals are involved in events. There's lots of communications that go on at events. It's a very, very important aspect of an event. So I want to talk through a little bit about why communications are important at events and how you can leverage communications to make your event even more successful. Sound like a plan?
Great. Yes.
All right. So we're going to start off kind of talking through, what an ideal communications and event strategy looks like. Can you give us? I know I started off with a big
great question. Actually, it brings up a good point. I mean, it's obvious, right? Events are communications, right? What is the purpose of bringing people together in any situation is to be able to communicate with one another. And I think that actually, as obvious as that is, that often gets lost. There is often a disconnect between sort of the events, the quote unquote events team, or the people that are sort of pulling the event together, and that communications team. There may be, enough of a connection to recognize it. Okay, here's the content that we're producing. Here's the number of hours that we need to have in general session or breakouts of that sort of thing. But that's sort of where it ends, right? There's a bit of a disconnect in the idea that producing the event itself, designing the event design itself should sort of be designed around those communications parameters. So you absolutely need to start with a very strong communications plan, but then also have the ability to translate that into, okay, how do we best communicate that in an event format, right? Is that best communicated in a general session room full of 1,000 people? Or are these topics better communicated in small groups or in breakouts or that sort of thing? And so often companies, I think, maybe look toward efficiency rather than effectiveness in those kinds of situations. Well, we've got all of these hours of content, of communications that we get out, so let's just do it in the mass setting, right, and sort of get it done. But what do you lose, right, in that efficient, in creating that efficient way of producing or getting out as much content as quickly as possible? What's sort of lost? And so I think really reapproaching or reimagining the way that we're communicating with folks, or what it is that we're trying to communicate, and understanding, okay, are there ways that we can design the format of our event, the type of event that we're having, around those communications, those objectives that we have, and the things that we want to be able to communicate with folks.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's a lot more strategic than I think people think about. It's more than just your invites or the content on the screen, right? I love what you said about how do you communicate certain messages. Does it make sense for it to be in a workshop or in a breakout session or a large group or some other format? And I think if you're looking at an event as a whole, sometimes you're caught up on we got to get a good venue, we got to make sure there's enough rooms, and you kind of lose that aspect of it, that strategic aspect. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that and how companies might be able to rethink their events. Where should they start?
I think the first thing that they should do is look at sort of those internal resources and the teams that they have together, and make sure that those folks are involved. So often, let's say in a larger organization, they may have an internal events team, right? These folks that day in, day out, they're producing events, right? They know how to source, how to get these things done. But at the same time, again, they're a bit disconnected then from those bigger picture goals and objectives and maybe the communication that's happening. So they're used to producing that annual sales kickoff that's 3 days, 2 days of general session, 2 days of breakouts, that sort of thing. And they're not being involved, or even their suppliers in our case, right? We're constantly pushing our clients to, recognize the value in involving those teams of people that are actually responsible for producing these programs. Make sure that they understand sort of what those big picture goals and objectives are. Make sure that they're at the table and having those discussions and providing feedback and ideas around how can we be more effective. at this event? How can we better design the event? What sort of venue should we be looking at? What are the things that we can do within the general session room to change up even things as simple as the seating layout? Should we be in round? Should we be in classroom? Should we be in theater style? Based on what it is that we're trying to communicate, rather than just purely what are the parameters of the show? How many people? How many days? That's sort of a lot of companies stop there with the event design, and that's not where it should be happening, right?
Yeah.
It should be designed around those communications, around those goals and objectives.
Yeah, I find that fascinating, especially from a marketing perspective. I think we think through that with external events a lot. What are the messages we need to get out to our prospects or to our audience, but not necessarily on an internal aspect, right? And I think communications comes into that, right? A lot of times they're managing the, messages that go out digitally to employees or, overarching objectives from an internal communication standpoint, but not necessarily connecting those events together, right? I think that is a very important aspect. So, when we look at companies, especially companies that have a lot of different internal events, what are some ways that they can leverage the communications department to, create consistency between those events?
Again, I think firstly, making sure that communications department is involved in sort of the early stages of the decisions that are made around events. I mean, there are certain things that happen with events, like, for example, when you sign a venue contract, you're sort of locked in, right, at that point, to that venue, to those number of days, those number of rooms, that sort of thing. And then if at that point, then you bring that you involve the communications team after that, their hands are tied, right? We only have these spaces and these days in this location. Whereas if we can get those folks involved, bring more people to the table earlier in the process, we can make sure that we have that flexibility to design those, to create those experiences, to really make sure that we're able to deliver that message in the most effective and efficient way as possible.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing that companies have to do. They have to realize that, involving their suppliers, involving their internal resources earlier in the process is actually a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you say about event design. They're kind of the designers. Now, once we get into the actual event, how about content? What are some ways that companies can strengthen their content for the actual event?
We talked about it, I think, even earlier, maybe in the last episode. People are frankly used to rich content, right? They're used to being engaged, but they're also used to, short moments, right? They're used to attention grabbers, that sort of thing. And so I think companies need to recognize that. And I think they have, right? Obviously in the marketing side, the way that we market ourselves externally and the way that we go after, sort of outreach type projects, we need to sort of look at that internally as well and realize that, yes, we have, in many cases, companies have very complex products and services, and there's a lot of data that needs to be gone through, and there's no escaping that. But how do we also recognize that attention spans are short? And so embracing that and understanding, like we've talked about before, is there user-generated content that we can leverage? Are there stories that can be told, through colleagues rather than leadership, people that, the audience may more easily identify with and connect to? Are there engagements that happen throughout, whether it's not like it's new technology, but things like audience polling. We really like the idea. Take the dynamic speaker, but we've seen it before, the sort of choose your own adventure talk, where we're constantly coming back and engaging the audience and sort of driving those points, but at the same time saying, okay, now with that understanding, where would you like me, I'm the speaker, where would you like me to go now? Kind of like you're doing today. Sort of throwing some curveballs at the speaker and making it exciting for folks. Certainly Q&A, audience engagement, all of those types of things I think are still tried and true for sure, but at the same time, how do we sort of leverage the new technology along with the new attention spans?
Well, I find the attention span thing interesting because I think there's a dichotomy in it where, platforms like TikTok are driving that kind of shorter bite-sized pieces, but you also have very long-form podcasts that people tune in and listen to.
Right.
And so I think companies can start to look at that, and that's, again, maybe your marketer, your communications person, you know, they come in and can take that viewpoint and help you craft something that resonates. And I think your point about, it's about connection, right? It's about how does the audience feel involved? And I find it very interesting to look at what is going on in the digital world and being able to bring that into the physical event world. So I love what you said about, you know, connection. I
really like your point actually there, and you're right. And I've actually thought about this a lot, and I have a lot of school age kids as well, right? And so, you know, the educational aspect of that, right, coming from sort of the virtual learning to in person and that sort of thing. And I think there may be, you know, a cue that corporate can even take from those institutions, which is maybe the longer format, the heavier data, you know, sort of info, we can ask people to kind of consume on their own, in their own pace, right? And ahead of time, sort of presenting folks with, here are the things that we need you to sort of understand coming into this meeting. And then when we're together now, we're going to be able to sort of do more interaction, right? Because we don't have so much of that long format content to present to. Because I agree with you. I think, you know, in their own time, when people love long format content. Right?
When you're driving or can do something
else. But now if we bring them all together in one place and ask them to sit through a 2-hour talk, that's going to be a little more difficult. Whereas if they already have consumed and understand those 2 hours of content, and now we tell them, based on that, now let's interact. Let's have you sit in groups of 10 and discuss what it is you've heard, come with more ideas, be a little more active. So I really like that idea too. I think corporations could benefit from that greatly. Like rethinking, do we need to drive the full content during the meeting, or can we sort of feed some of that ahead of time and then really leverage the meeting as the time to kind of collect feedback and interact?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know about you, but I have a really hard time sitting in a chair for more than a couple hours. So, you know, it's getting people involved, rethinking how you communicate the things that you need to. And I think, you know, the people who can help drive that in an organization are the people who are managing communications and think about that stuff. So let's move now to kind of helping attendees understand kind of the purpose and the goals of an event. So, you know, from your annual kickoff to your incentive trip to all the different events that people might be attending, sometimes, you know, it turns into, oh, I have to go to this other event and sit around and, you know, whatever. Or if you're going to an incentive trip, oh, it's a party, you know. How do communications help drive that understanding for attendees of what the goal is of this event? What is the purpose? What should you be learning here? Can you help kind of define that a little bit?
Yeah, I think there again, we have to break down assumptions, right? When I hear something, even as an attendee, I hear, oh, I'm going to a sales kickoff, or I'm going to a trade show, or I'm going to our incentive program, those sorts of things. A lot of assumptions sort of come with that. And so I think the first thing that we have to do is make sure that we have a strategy, a communications plan that helps break down those assumptions. You know, things like sales kickoff, and there's even some marketing tactics that can be implemented there. Things like the sales kickoff. Don't call it a sales kickoff. Maybe brand it. It's Drive 2024, or it's, you know, Summit, or those sorts of things. So now there's a bit of a brand to it, and we can kind of put some communications behind it. And so we're very specific around those communications and actually letting people know that, hey, we're coming together in this instance for these specific reasons, right? Not just because it's sales kickoff, you can hear from the CEO on how we did last year and what your goals are for this year. It's, you know, we'll break that down a little bit more. No, we're going to actually use this as a platform, as an opportunity to not only share with you goals and objectives, but also maybe get your feedback on those sort of things. So I think just like in any sort of goal setting or employee evaluation, that sort of thing, make sure that's part of it. Here is specifically our expectation for you in attending this program. and why we think it's of value to you. We see it often there again with those external facing meetings, maybe a user conference or an exhibitor trade show, where we need to sort of write a value proposition where we're asking somebody to maybe not only step away from their office to attend an event, but also incur expense, right? We want you to pay a registration fee, and we want you to buy a plane ticket and pay for a hotel room and buy meals and that sort of thing. And so when we're asking that much of folks, we very much need to give them a real specific value proposition on here's the value, here's the return that you're going to get on that. And I think that's important for us to do for those internal meetings as well. What is the return? What is the ROI that I'm going to get individually? Not only me individually, but then where does that build for the company of attending this type of event?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the fun ways I've seen it implemented, that you can send out emails beforehand, but also, brochures and different things that you can do throughout that can help communicate those objectives more than just an agenda or, giveaways or things like that. So before we wrap up, I just want to talk a little bit more about, that value of communications at events. Like, how do we really boil that down into something that somebody who, let's say they go to their leaders and they say, I think we could really drive more value by implementing a communication strategy around our events. What would you recommend to that person?
Good one. I think the first thing is really sort of breaking it down into any sort of similar business strategy, business planning, right? And so kind of taking those big chunks. What is the value proposition? What is the mission, right? What is the purpose of this thing? How do we really hone that down into, if one of my favorite things to ask clients is, if we're going to bring all these people together, what is the one thing that we want them all to do when they leave? Can we at least even identify that, right? And so I think if we can start with those sort of primary objectives, and then again, go back to that value proposition. What is the value proposition? What is the ROI that we're trying to accomplish here? And set those goals specific to the event. Don't just have the event because we've had the event, but actually, how do we goal set around it? What are the outcomes that we're looking for, and how do we measure and track those sorts of things? And at least if we're going into, and those aren't always very easy to track for sure. Can we prove that, very directly that an incentive program increased sales over the next year? There are ways. We can work with finance departments and sales teams to sort of track those sorts of things. But at the same time, there are other metrics that we can put in place just either through surveys or what have you. But at least if we've goal set, if we've identified sort of those objectives and then set parameters around how we might at least be able to track that, at least we know we're working toward those goals and kind of can track that year over year. So I think that's the first thing that folks have to approach leadership with is, how do we get specific around our goals, our objectives, and the tracking of those things?
With trying to improve your events year over year and, getting rid of that mindset of we've always done this. I think we talked about that in the previous podcast. Go check it out on Spotify or YouTube. But, getting rid of that mindset, really understanding how you can drive more value with your events. And I think, I might just be biased because I'm a marketer, but I think communications and strategy is very, very important. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Brian, for your thoughts. I think that, we love communications around events. And if you or your team is looking for some new ideas or some strategy planning sessions, always feel free to reach out to us at gogather.com. We'd love to brainstorm with you and see how we can push your events forward. Other than that, thank you for joining us on the Gather Gurus podcast. We are here creating new content, trying to get some new ideas for you all, and we'd love to hear from you what you'd love to hear on our podcast. So drop us a comment below or reach out to us again on gogather.com and let us know what you want to hear. And thank you all again. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, everybody.